Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. If you're a yoga practitioner or teacher who knows that there's more to yoga than poses, but you're wondering where to find that, come join our quiet little party. Here you'll find resources to help you deepen your practice, as well as insightful conversations with yoga, movement, and meditation teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. So we talk about all things gentle yoga, meditation, yin, restorative, yoga therapy, mindfulness, and more. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hello, everyone. How's it going? Thanks for being here today for So You Think You Can't Meditate Part 3. This is episode 35 and the podcast is growing. It is exciting to see that people are tuning in from all over the place. I think we've been downloaded in like 23 countries, which just blows my mind. So amazing. So thank you everyone who's listening. And if you are enjoying the podcast, can I ask you a little favor? It would be so helpful if you could go leave a little rating and review on whatever podcast platform or app you might be listening on, especially on the Apple Podcasts app. I know that the reviews are part of what helps this show get in front of more listeners. It's kind of like how their algorithm decides what to put in front of you when you go on to your app. So if you can just share a few words there, it can really help us grow and help spread the word about integrated mindfulness and movement practices. So big thank you if you've already done that. Thank you in advance if you're going to do it now. I really appreciate it. And so today we have the third part of a series of episodes. They've been spread out over a few months. Basically, they're about troubleshooting some of the obstacles that come up in meditation. So if you've wanted to learn meditation, but you've tried and kind of struggled, or it just didn't quite, find your right fit, these episodes are for you. So the first one was episode 23, and it covered some of the expectations that people often have that get in the way of meditation, especially along the lines of what we think counts as meditation. Part 2 was episode 27, where I talked about specifics of practicing with physical pain and how to work with that in meditation. And so today we're going to talk about what to consider if you have tried meditation, but you found that you felt anxious, or you kind of got overwhelmed with strong feelings, or you're worried that you'll get overwhelmed and just kind of like feel too much if you sit down in the stillness and quiet of meditation. Like with physical pain, meditation can be really helpful for anxiety and different kinds of mental and emotional distress, but we have to work with those states really skillfully. Generic kind of like basic meditation instructions might not always be enough to create the conditions for safety and give you the intended outcome of relief that you're looking for. But you can learn a few things to try and apply. And I'm going to go over a lot of those kinds of things today that might help you, whatever kind of meditation you're doing, that if you apply some of these things, you hopefully will get more benefit out of your meditation. It's totally worth experimenting with some different techniques and ways of creating a meditation practice that works for you, because mindfulness meditation is a really powerful way to begin changing our more problematic thought patterns and painful habits. It can really be empowering to start to see these thoughts and emotions for what they are, and to start to feel like you have some ability to work with them and not just like be run over by them. And with practice, we also gain a deeper understanding of the impermanence of events, the things that are happening to us, the feelings we have about it, the thoughts we have about it. So we start to know on like a real experiential gut level that whole "this too shall pass" saying becomes more than a saying. It becomes like our real knowing. And so we see like this wave of anxiety, it's not going to last forever, or this feeling of grief, it's going to change one day. We start to see this bigger picture, we access more perspective, And this shows us that this state or this feeling is not all there is in the world. And it's also not who you are. So we start to unstick our identity and get a little bit less fixated from these experiences we're having. And when we realize that not all of our thoughts are necessarily even true, that can be quite liberating too. So remember, it is not a problem to have thoughts during meditation. Like, please forget about that whole thing you hear about clearing your mind or thinking that you have to be perfectly calm or free from thoughts and emotions in order to meditate. That's just not how it works. And we couldn't have these kinds of insights that I'm talking about without observing our thinking processes in the laboratory of our meditation practice. In mindfulness meditation, we fully embrace and include the totality of our experience. We're observing, but in the spirit of asking, what's true right now? Like, what's here right now? We practice mindfulness of emotions and mindfulness of thinking so that we can arrive at a greater understanding and really relate better to whatever is here. And in case you're thinking this is some kind of like modern psychotherapy influenced version of meditation, it's really not. These aspects of mindfulness have been there since the early Buddhist teachings. In the Satipatthana Sutta, for example, which is like the foundational text on mindfulness in the Theravadan Buddhist tradition, Satipatthana, by the way, is usually translated as the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So it's a text that gives us instructions that move through mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of all our pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral reactions to things, mindfulness of emotions and thoughts and all the different contents of the mind, and mindfulness of different truths and insights, like the ones that help us to be more awake and the ones that we find hinder our clarity. So it covers a ton of ground. It's really pretty all-inclusive. And this is all like right there in this ancient text that gives instructions for mindfulness practice. So that said, I'm going to offer some tools and ideas for anxiety and intense emotion within this framework of meditation, but I don't consider them replacements for mental health supports like therapy or medication when needed. Sometimes meditation is most effective in combination with these other resources. Other times, some stabilization is necessary through therapeutic means before meditation can even really be useful. So please take care of yourself in the way that's the most appropriate and most healing for you at this time or at any point in the future. So I talked about some of the reasons already that meditation can be beneficial in working with anxiety and other strong emotions. But here's the challenge. Silence, stillness, and inward focus can heighten the experience of racing thoughts or distressing thoughts or strong emotions, or when we're feeling lost and overwhelmed in it all. I just saw a cartoon yesterday online where one character was looking at the other and he says, "Hey, let's do something really scary tonight." And the other character says, like, "What?" So the first guy, he's standing over by a light switch and he says, "Let's go to bed early and be alone with our thoughts." Right? So being alone with our thoughts, being still, being in the silence, having this inward focus, sometimes this can really be kind of daunting and it can bring up a lot. So the key to transforming our thoughts and emotions through meditation is really our ability to stay in the present moment with them. When we get lost or triggered, we're not in the present moment with what's going on, we're kind of like drawn into the past or the future. Our nervous system doesn't know the difference between that negative event happening in reality or just in our mind. Being stuck in future worries or intense past experiences can be harmful, and that is not what we're being asked to do in meditation. I want to make that quite clear because I think we have certain kind of meditation teachings and phrases and things you'll hear that can sometimes need some nuance. Like when we say something like the way out is through, or you have to feel it to heal it. in meditation, we're talking about the process of learning to relate to thoughts and feelings from a place of being grounded in the present. We're not recommending drowning in the struggle. We're just talking about not avoiding it. So that doesn't mean that you have to feel it to heal it today. There are times when the emotional charge is just too high, or the momentum of the thoughts are just so strong that if we try to sit and just be with it, we're probably just reinforcing the patterns that we're stuck in. And at those times, we need other skillful means to help us get to the point where we can have these things come up and get ourselves back to the present moment and have that vantage point for working with them. So that ground in the present moment makes all the difference in us being able to transform a thought or emotion versus just like reliving it or kind of amplifying it. So these kinds of sayings, the way out is through, you have to feel it to heal it, that kind of just be with it as it arises, they connect to the part of mindfulness practice that is about recognizing what's going on, seeing it more clearly, and developing a new way to hold it. And that is what really leads to release, or the kind of shift that we are looking for. The way out is through is true, but that doesn't mean that you walk out into a rainstorm without your raincoat and your boots, right? You move through it skillfully when you have the tools and the capacity to do that. So you kind of have to take a saying like that with a grain of salt, or at least realize it's only talking about one aspect of the practice and might need a little asterisk or some nuance, or it might just need to apply at the right time, and it's not always the case. And so when we are ready to consider being with thoughts and emotions, it can be helpful to start to think of them as energies, just energies, not as good or bad feelings, but just different kinds of energies. So we kind of reframe them in a way that allows us to experience them differently as patterns of sensation, patterns of experience that rise and fall, ebb and flow. They kind of come and do their little dance, and then they fade and they change forms. And so when we can see it kind of like that, almost like a weather pattern, it removes some of the charge of meaning making. And I can see this sometimes with anxiety, like when I have that kind of restless, searching, unsettled energy come up, and then my mind will kind of go looking for where the problem is. Because sometimes it's not that there was anything really wrong in that moment, but this energy arose, and it turns into a whole worry and anxiety thing when my mind starts to create stories to explain or match that energy. And maybe you've had an experience like that too. Another way to play with this whole thing of, it's just an energy, is pick a song, go listen to a fierce, intense, like angry song, a heavy metal or something like that. And you can let that big, empowered, protective, fierce energy move through you. You can dance with it. You can just like roar. And then when the song is over, you can let it go because you didn't identify with it, or it wasn't yours. You borrowed it, right? If you don't make a story out of it, it's just an energy moving through. It's just like the music moving through. And we can learn how to be with an emotional energy like that. This is like an example, but we can learn to sit with it kind of like that in meditation, just feeling it arise and pass, but not feeding into it, not identifying with it. So I hope that gives a few ideas already of just kind of the way of thinking, this kind of mindfulness mindset of how to work with different thoughts and emotions, and like when we might need to adjust what we're doing a little bit. And let's talk about a few practical ideas and tips to consider. So one is that you can meditate with your eyes open. In some meditation traditions, they tend to teach with the eyes closed, and in some traditions, they actually tend to teach meditation with your eyes open. So both ways are very valid, and whichever type of meditation you're practicing, or whichever group you're practicing with, whatever tradition it's in, just, you can choose for yourself. Like, please feel empowered to choose for yourself. For some people, eyes closed helps them focus and have fewer distractions. And for others, it's really disorienting to have their eyes closed, and they feel more present if they can stay connected to the room visually. Sometimes that just feels safer. So if you want to practice with your eyes open, you can just let your gaze settle down a few feet in front of you in a relaxed way. It's like not necessarily meaning that you're just like looking around all the time, but just kind of letting your eyes still be aware of the environment that you're in. Sometimes that's really helpful. It would also be good to start with shorter meditations, like 5 or 10 minutes. And you can go for longer sessions later as you get more confident and it starts to feel good to do so. So it's not forced. It's just like feeling good. You want more time. You can start to sit longer. I think doing too much too soon is one of the most common reasons that things start to feel overwhelming, like especially when you're really new to meditation practice. So shorter meditations are a good place to start. Less is more sometimes. And you might also want to start with guided meditations, because sometimes hearing a voice guiding you, a little voice coming back in every few moments, can really help you stay present or just call you back in when you start to get a little bit lost. You also want to consider choosing your anchor or your focal point for the meditation and figuring out what works best for you as far as what you're placing your attention on. And, we commonly teach a lot of breath meditation, but sometimes breath meditation doesn't feel comfortable for people with anxiety because anxiety can have such a strong effect on the breath and all the muscles that are involved in breathing, like the diaphragm and like all of the shoulder muscles and chest muscles and, all of the knots in our stomach and all of the things that we might feel if we start to really tune into the breath that closely. So there are other meditation anchors available within mindfulness practice. Some other time I'll make a whole other episode about choosing an anchor for meditation because there's lots to say about that, I think. But just for today, it's enough to say if focusing on the breath is feeding into anxious thoughts, anxious feelings, or just kind of like spotlighting the anxious sensations for you, in that case, I would highly encourage you to try a different anchor, like being mindful of sounds or practicing metta phrases or doing walking meditation. You can ask your teacher for suggestions and instructions if you have someone you can check in with about your practice. Mindfulness of sounds in particular can be really good because sounds happen in the present moment. So an anchor needs to be something that happens in the present moment. And sounds give us a little bit more of an external focus. So that gives us a little bit of space away from sensations of stress, or like if we're just kind of struggling with the physiological sensations and effects of stress, like tension in the body or elevated heart rate or feeling the breath is kind of constricted. Mindfulness of sounds is sort of like removes us from that, but gives us a grounding in the present moment through just tuning into the soundscape and the changing, sounds that we can hear rising and falling in our environment. So that can be a really good anchor. Walking meditation can also be really good for some similar reasons. Like it gives us more of an external focus on the sounds and sights that are here in the present moment. Helps us be present in the space that we're in. That can sometimes be really helpful for our nervous system. And it's especially useful to do walking meditation if you're finding the stillness aspect of meditating to be problematic for you. Like if being still is making you feel more intense and amped up, and it's like that pressure is building, you might need to discharge some of that energy through movement. Movement can really help. There are formal walking meditation practices that are really simple, so it still gives you the container of a meditation method. It's not just like pacing or just randomly walking, but the pattern of walking meditation can just be slowly walking back and forth in a mindful way. And I often just walk across the length of my yoga mat right here in this room in my home, and so it's really simple. You don't necessarily need any special place to do it. But it is also really lovely to do outdoors if you can, when the weather permits and when you have the space. You can check out, also, I did a whole episode about walking meditation, episode 15 of the podcast, if you want to hear more details about how to go about walking meditation and a little bit more about the benefits of that kind of practice. So there's that resource. And the last anchor that I mentioned just a minute ago was to practice metta, loving kindness, or compassion meditations. Those could be an option for your anchor. You can recite metta phrases and let that be your whole meditation. That can be a really soothing way of practicing and can help your mind to settle down. It actually can really help your concentration and your focus and your ability to place your attention on something that's helpful, like compassion phrases. And we can also use our metta or compassion phrases on an as-needed basis. This is one of the ways we work with them in mindfulness meditation. So that would look like, imagine you're doing a breath meditation and something intense comes up. So you check in with yourself, and if you're feeling pretty grounded, then maybe you just bring mindfulness to that experience and observe the feeling passing through. So you just stay with it. You feel it to heal it. Or other times it might be like on that day, you just start to feel too unbalanced with it or overwhelmed. So that's where you might choose to change the channel, quote unquote, and bring your focus over to metta or compassion phrases. So you take your attention off the intense feeling that's arising and over to something soothing like metta and compassion phrases. It gives you a different place to land your attention and to kind of settle in and to do something that's more helpful in that moment. I do think that it is helpful to have a teacher or be in a group where you can check in about your practice and ask questions, especially if some of these kinds of things have arisen for you when you're trying to learn meditation. The apps and the guided meditations and all are online are really, really great because they are so accessible, but they leave out, interaction with a teacher. And when you can interact with a teacher and actually talk to them and ask your specific questions, they can really help normalize experiences or help you find more supportive techniques for where you are in that moment. So I do want to mention that as a resource, finding a real human to practice with, whether it's live online or whether it's in person. Real humans are great. And in the meantime, I do hope these suggestions help to give you a sense of the options that are available and the possibilities of mindfulness practice. I entitle all of this, So You Think You Can't Meditate, kind of, in a just playful way, but, hopefully it makes you feel like it is possible to meditate if it's something that you're interested in doing. You can get through these obstacles, you can, move through these challenges, and you can learn to do practices that will work for you. Thank you so much for listening to this and to this little mini series that I've done over the last few months, and just for practicing, for bringing your curiosity to the practice, and for bringing your presence into the world. Please feel free to reach out anytime with your questions, requests for podcast topics or guests, or for classes you'd like to see me offer, or whatever else you'd like to share. My email is mail@movedtomeditate.com, and the website is movedtomeditate.yoga. And until next time, thank you very much for listening, and be well. So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.